Hello, Jacksonites. Welcome to a new franchise review series. A movie that I've been meaning to review for quite a while now, but I'm finally getting around to reviewing these movies. Though I'll admit it's gonna be a little difficult for me to do that because I love this franchise so much. By the way, I apologize if my mouth seems a little robotic tonight. I got 3 canker sores on my lips, and it kind of hurts to speak. But I'm gonna try to muscle through it and see if I can get these videos out. But anyway, today I'll be reviewing the start of one of my favorite film franchises of all time, the Lethal Weapon series. Of course, starting with the first one, the one that started it all. So, Lethal Weapon. Ooh, we already have one viewer for me. Lethal Weapon was always a series that I heard about when I was growing up. And I knew that Danny Glover was in it because I saw Predator 2 before I saw the Lethal Weapon series. And I remember that Danny Glover from Predator 2 was in these movies because that was the first of his movies that I ever saw. And it wasn't until I was about 15 years old when I was up at my grandparents' lake property when my grandmother decided to put on the third Lethal Weapon movie. Now, I initially really was not interested in seeing the franchise, but I finally got around to saying, fuck it, I'll watch Lethal Weapon 3. And boy, am I glad that I did, because instantly I was hooked. And thankfully, my grandfather, he had the first 3 Lethal Weapon movies, theatrical cuts only. By the way, I am reviewing the director's cut of this film. Even though there's really not that much of a difference between the theatrical and director's cut. Director's cut is maybe 5 or 6 minutes longer, but still, it's a director's cut. Stick with that. And my grandfather thankfully had the first 3 Lethal Weapon movies on VHS up at that lake house, so I watched the first 3 movies in reverse order. I watched 3, then I watched 2, then I watched the first one. And then I watched the rest of the series in order after that. And I was instantly hooked. I didn't see the 4th movie until about a year or so after I saw the first 3, but I'll get to that when I get to Lethal Weapon 4. But yeah, I was instantly hooked when I got into Lethal Weapon series. And now that I have this 4-pack on me, as well as the first season of the reboot TV series, which I do plan on reviewing once I'm done with the Lethal Weapon movies. But more on that later. So, with my history of Lethal Weapon out the way, let's get into the plot. The plot is kind of simple. Sadly, that's one of my issues with the movie, but still, let's get into it. So, LAPD Homicide Sergeant Roger Murtaugh, played by the glorious Danny Glover, shortly after his 50th birthday, is partnered up with Sergeant Martin Riggs, a former Special Forces soldier, played by Mel Gibson. Riggs has unfortunately lost his wife in a car accident 3 years prior to the film, and has turned suicidal and has been taking his angerness, bitterness, and aggression out on suspects, leading to his superiors saying, okay, just trench him the fuck out of here. So Murtaugh and Riggs, they find themselves very quickly butting heads with each other because Murtaugh is he's the by-the-book, stick-up-his-ass type of police officer, whereas Riggs is the nutty, crazy, go-get-'em, fearless warrior type cop. And so obviously those ideals don't really gel too well. Murtaugh is contacted by an old Vietnam War buddy of his named Michael Hensacker, played by, I think it's Tom Atkins. Yes, it is Tom Atkins. However, before they can meet up, Murtaugh learns that Amanda Hunsaker, the first of Michael's two daughters, has apparently committed suicide by jumping from her balcony in her apartment. That's like eight stories or so up. However, the autopsy reports show that Amanda had been poisoned with drain cleaner before she jumped, because she was taking pills and snorting coke before she jumped, making this look like a possible homicide. Hunsaker then tells Murtaugh that he was concerned about his daughters being involved in drugs, prostitution, and pornography and that kind of shit. And he was trying to get in contact with Murtaugh to see if he could help her escape that kind of shit. Murtaugh and Riggs attempt to track down and question Amanda's pimp. However, they find a cocaine lab on the premises, which leads to a short shootout. Riggs kills the pimp. However, he saves the life of Murtaugh in the process, who Pimp tries to kill. Pimp gets shot in the leg by Murtaugh. However, when he tries to pull a gun on Murtaugh when Riggs tries to arrest him, Riggs pushes Murtaugh out of the way, gets the gun in the air, then shoots the pimp, which he falls into a pool, and he's wrapped up with the pool cover, which is a thin plastic, and he proceeds to suffocate and drown while being wrapped in plastic underwater. And so it's at this point where Murtaugh starts to tolerate his new partner. And the case seems to be closed. Riggs is aware that the only witness to Amanda's death was another prostitute named Dixie, who suspiciously was working away from her normal streets. And they attempt to question Dixie later at her home. However, it goes up in flames and goes kaboom when they approach it. And Riggs inspects the damage afterwards and finds parts of a mercury switch from the bomb debris, indicating that this is a professional hit. And children who had been nearby witnessed a man approach the house with a tattoo on his arm similar to Riggs's, which was a Special Forces Vietnam tattoo. And Murtaugh starts to suspect that Hunsaker knows more than he let out. And the two approach Hunsaker before the funeral of his daughter, where he reveals that he had been previously part of a group called Shadow Company, which was a heroin smuggling operation run by former Special Forces soldiers from the Vietnam War, masterminded by the retired General Peter McAllister and his right-hand man, Mr. Joshua. Peter McAllister being played by, Mitchell Ryan, and the amazingly over-the-top Gary Busey as Mr. Joshua, another Predator 2 tie-in. Hunsaker had been laundering the money through his bank to make it clean and make it look on the tax reports, to quote the film. However, he wanted to get out of the business, and when McAllister found out that he'd contacted Murtaugh, the general had Amanda killed. And as the two are speaking, Joshua arrives in a chopper and kills Hunsaker. And Shadow Company attempts to kill Riggs in a drive-by shooting with a shotgun, but he is saved because Riggs decided to wear a bulletproof vest. Smart. And to quote Riggs, 2 inches higher would have hit his head, 2 inches lower I'd have been a falsetto for life. Murtaugh and Riggs decide to fake Riggs' death to kind of gain an upper hand on the villains. Shadow Company later kidnaps Murtaugh's daughter, Rianne, and they demand to him that he turn himself over to them for her return. Murtaugh and Riggs plan an ambush in El Mirage Lake. This takes place in L.A. With Riggs providing sniper support, him revealing earlier that he shot a man in Laos during the Vietnam War from 1,000 yards out in high winds, which is a very difficult thing to do. Um, let's see. But Riggs is caught by McAllister, um, and taken to an unknown location when they're just overwhelmed by the amount of men that's there. Murtaugh and Riggs are tortured for information. However, Riggs manages to get out of his bonds and overpower his captors, frees Murtaugh and Rianne, and they escape to find themselves at a busy nightclub that's used as a front for Shadow Company. And with their cover blown, McAllister and Joshua attempt to escape separately. Joshua manages to get away. However, McAllister ends up crashing his car when Murtaugh shoots the driver of a car, and he crashes his car on Hollywood Boulevard and is killed when hand grenades in his car blow up because of smoke and fire and heat and all that kind of shit. Murtaugh and Riggs race over to Murtaugh's home, knowing Joshua will be there to take out his family. And they arrive in time to stop him. And, well, Riggs and Joshua proceed to get into a fantastic fight out on Murtaugh's front lawn. The officers arrive to take Joshua away. However, after Riggs defeats him, he breaks free from cuffs and grabs a gun, and both Murtaugh and Riggs gun him down, dead. And after visiting his wife's grave at the end of the film, Riggs spends Christmas with the Murtaughs, having put aside their differences and become friends, and bonding with the rest of Murtaugh's family. And Riggs also gives Murtaugh a symbolic gift, which is an unfired hollow point bullet he had been saving to commit suicide. And he says to Murtaugh's daughter he doesn't need it anymore, thus ending the film. So how about this plot? Well, it is a little simple, but for what it does, it gets these two best friends together, and they form this unstoppable duo. Hey, it's fine. For me, at least, it's fine. However, it still is a bit of an issue, but I'll elaborate further. So let's move on to the pros of the first Lethal Weapon, shall we? First off, the characters, for the most part, they're great. Mel Gibson does a really good job as Riggs. Mel Gibson, he's really good at playing angry and psychotic in his films. While the first movie that I saw Mel Gibson in that I really liked was Signs, directed by M. Night Shyamalan. The film that really, really made me a fan of Mel Gibson was actually the Lethal Weapon 3. Because I thought Mel Gibson was only like a drama or comedy actor, but it turns out he's a really fucking good action movie actor too. And is these movies that really made him one of the best and one of the most underrated action movies actors. And yes, I know he did have some problems in real life, and I am aware of the meltdown that he had in public with, a girl that he had a child with, and just some issues that he had a few years ago. And people have stuff like that all the time. It's unfortunate. I don't let that type of stuff really drag my my opinion of the man in his films down. So in these movies, he is absolutely amazing. Danny Glover is also really fucking good as Roger Murtaugh. And I would not be surprised if this is the role that everybody remembers Danny Glover for. Like, whenever I see Danny Glover in movies, even in Predator 2, I at times keep expecting him to say his catchphrase, which he coins in this film. I'm too old for this shit. Which he says quite a few times throughout the first 4 films. Sadly, he doesn't say it in the TV series because you can't say shit in a TV show. Well, actually, yes, you can, but Lethal Weapon is not. The Lethal Weapon TV series is not like Sons of Anarchy or The Walking Dead, sadly. But whatever. But overall, Danny Glover is really, really solid as Murtaugh. And the rest of the cast, Gary Busey and Mitchell Ryan, Well, that's because Tales from the Crypt was an HBO show, so they are allowed to be as uncensored as they want. Tracy Wolf as Rhiann Murtaugh, she does a decent job. Damon Hines, who I think he plays Nick Murtaugh throughout the rest of the series, he does fine, though I think he's better in the sequels. Mary Ellen Trainor as Dr. Stephanie Woods, who was the same chick who played Mikey's wife, or not Mikey's wife, Mikey's mom in The Goonies. She does fine. Steve Cahan as Captain Murphy. Captain Murphy's probably the only character in the entire series that I legitimately do not like, because he's always just in grump fuck mode. And it's actually one thing I think they do better in the new Lethal Weapon TV series. But in Lethal Weapon 3, I'll finally elaborate on my feelings on him, because I actually think that's his last appearance in the series. But overall, the acting from the well, I guess I'll just get two pros out of the way. Is that the characters are great and the acting overall is very, very solid, except for a couple roles, which I'll get to when I get to the cons. But overall, the characters are great. Mel Gibson and Danny Glover, they have fantastic chemistry together. You totally buy them as being partners, and you totally buy them as being these two different ideals that just really don't clash together, but over time they start to mingle together and they start to learn to work with each other. So they're great. Absolutely great. One of the best, if not potentially the best buddy cop pair in all of, the buddy cop genre in its entirety. Pro number 3, and again, pro number 2 is the acting. Overall, the acting is very good. Pro number 3 is the pacing of the film is overall very, very solid. It generally does have a bit of a faster pace, which I do like, especially for my action movies. There's a couple of moments where it slows down, but that's usually just to build character and for us to get to know Riggs and Murtaugh. But overall, the pacing is very good. I'm never bored when I'm watching this movie because the pacing overall is just very, very solid. Pro number 4 is that the soundtrack to this movie is overall... Oh, Movie Buff Productions is here. Overall, the soundtrack for this movie is very... is very unique, but it also it screams Lethal Weapon. Like, had this movie had a different soundtrack, this movie just would not work as well as it does without this movie's soundtrack. Even though at times the soundtrack does kind of sound like a porno, because it uses It uses like that porno trumpet sound. I guess it's kind of it's hard to describe, but god damn, my legs itch. There's times where it sounds like the film is a borderline porno film because of its music. They use a lot of jazz soundtracks. I guess you could call it porn jazz. But overall, the soundtrack is very, very good. It's exciting and it's exhilarating when the action scenes are going on. It's very subtle when there's a bit of a quieter scene. Overall, the music lends itself very, very, very well to the movie. And like I said, had this movie not had the soundtrack that it's got, wouldn't work at all, in my opinion. Pro number 5 is that the film's humor is absolutely fantastic. This is labeled as a, let's see. Well, it's labeled as a buddy cop action movie. However, this movie's comedy is overall very, very, very well done. It's not one of those comedies where your sides are just splitting and you're absolutely in stitches laughing at the film. The humor is a lot more subtle and it's a lot more subdued, but there's just a lot of scenes where you'll get a few good snickers and laughs when watching the film. Usually because Riggs and Murtaugh are both some of the biggest smartasses in cinema history. And just the general vibe that the police station has, and just the attitude that they have towards each other. They've worked with each other so long. You know how it is when when you work at a job for so long and you get comfortable with your coworkers, and you're talking to them like you would talk to normal people if you were just hanging out outside of work. So you'd swear, you'd say slightly racist remarks that you're just being funny. Um, you'd say some sex jokes, some gay jokes, mama jokes or something, some shit like that. And overall, just the comedy in this movie, it's very, very, very solid. It's like iZombie. I think that's some of the best type of comedy, where it's not like in your face. It's trying so hard to make you laugh. Um, the film just says shit that a lot of people find to be really funny. They don't try to force the comedy, but they don't just don't they don't they it's not that they don't try hard enough either. They do some really clever writing, and they put in some really clever humor, which, hey, good for them. But like I said, these movies are not the type of films where you are just absolutely splitting your sides laughing. Though the one movie I think that comes closest to that type of humor is Lethal Weapon 3. Though the series does get funnier as they go on, especially with the introduction of Leo Getz, played by Joe Pesci, with the second movie. I'll elaborate on him when I get to Lethal Weapon 2. But overall, the humor in this movie is pretty fucking solid. And the last pro is that the action scenes in this movie are absolutely outstanding. Even though it's probably the tamest of the series, the action scenes are still great. I kind of equivalent this as the first Beverly Hills Cop film, where the action feels very small, and the plot itself feels very small. It's very prototypey, and this movie definitely is prototypey, just like the first Beverly Hills Cop. There may be some plans to review the Beverly Hills Cop movies, at least the first two. I'm not going to say when, because I don't know if I am going to do it, but it's a possibility. But anyway, overall, the action scenes in this movie are really good. The gunfights are well choreographed. They're very exciting. They're very well edited. Have I ever seen Beverly Hills Ninja? No, I have not seen Beverly Hills Ninja. I have heard of it, and I've heard kind of mixed opinions about it. Some say it's dumb, stupid fun, and some people just say it's dumb and stupid. But anyway, the gunfights are well choreographed. They're well paced. They're well edited. They don't go on too long, but they're not too short either. And also the final fight between Riggs and Mr. Joshua is really, really solid. Even though I do think the choreography could have been just a little better, it still is a really, really good fight scene. Both combatants use a mix of boxing, karate, and taekwondo against each other, and Riggs finally finishes Joshua off with his use of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is one of the best uses of non-cinematic Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that I've seen in a fight scene. It's very obvious, like if you're watching any of the Undisputed films, particularly 2, 3, and 4, you definitely can tell when someone is using Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu when they switch to it. However, in this movie, the use of it is very... Do I watch any Tyler Perry films? No, not really. I never really was a Tyler Perry fan. Anyway, Riggs' use of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in this movie, he seems like he's done this type of shit before, so it just comes natural to him. Comes as natural to him as breathing, which is really, really good. But like I said, I think the fight could have been just a little better choreographed. However, if you look at it as a more realistic type fight, it's great. The final fight scene is really, really good. Though I also think it could just have been a little longer, but still. I like long fight scenes, so that's just an issue on my part. However, are there any cons to this movie, despite all the praise that I'm giving it? And by the way, I just now realized this video may be a little short. My apologies for that, but oh well. But yes, there are some cons to this movie. They're not really huge ones, but I will elaborate on them. Con number one is that I do think in the overall scope of the series, this movie does have the weakest story. There's really not that much complicated plot that goes into this movie. However, part of that reason is because this is the first of the series. And while granted, I don't know if director Richard Donner had plans to make a franchise, he might have had a sequel in mind, but I don't know if he intended on making 4 movies. But because this is the first of the series, I can kind of understand why this has the weakest plot. But still, since it's part of a franchise and the overall general scope of the series, I do think this movie does have the weakest story. It's just a murder mystery type thing that just happens to have 2 feuding cops partnering up together, and they have to work with each other to solve the crime. That's pretty much it. And they become friends over the course of the film, and that's pretty much it to the film's plot. It's not really complicated. Granted, I don't like plots that are complicated, or at least complicated to the point where I don't know what the fuck is going on. But I definitely do think that this film's plot is just a little too simple. The next con I have here is that some of the acting in the film is overall kind of shaky. Not really from the main cast, though it does tie in with the villains, but I'll get to those in just a second. Mainly it's the kid actors in this movie that are just not good at all. The really young kids that witness Dixie's death, they're just terrible. Granted, you probably could say, well, they're just 6-year-old kids. Which is true, yes. Do I like the Dirty Harry films and the Death Wish films? I am not a Dirty Harry fan, and I've actually never seen any of the Death Wish films. I have heard the new Death Wish film with Bruce Willis is really good, and I do plan on checking that out. But no, I have not seen any of the Death Wish movies. Anyway, but the child actors in this movie are just absolutely terrible. I mean, they're borderline, like, Star Wars Episode 2 bad. Death Wish with Bruce Willis was awful. Well, you're the first person that I've heard and read saying that. Anyway, and how could you say a movie with Bruce... Well, okay. The 5th Die Hard movie was pretty awful, so I guess you could... I guess you could say that's a bad movie with Bruce Willis in it. Anyway, but moving on to the third con, the villains in this movie has the weakest villains, in my opinion. Gary Busey and what the fuck is this guy's name? Mitchell Ryan. Their acting is very wooden, in my opinion, and their villains have no personality whatsoever. They're just evil, devious, criminal masterminds. Whoop-de-goddamn do. There's no... Movie buff, I don't give 2 fucking shits what Rotten Tomatoes says about movies. Whatsoever. Never mention Rotten Tomatoes in my presence. Ever. Because they suck a lot of dick. Anyway, I have seen The Fifth... Hey, I like The Fifth Element. Bruce Willis is awesome in Fifth Element. Anyway, but overall, the Gary Busey and Mitchell Ryan's acting, it's very wooden. They're very one-dimensional villains. They're just evil for the sake of being evil. They're drug-smuggling bad guys just for the sake of being drug-smuggling bad guys. Whoop-de-goddamn-do. This movie definitely has the most basic villains of the entire series, in my opinion. So with all that said about Lethal Weapon, again, apologies for this review being kind of short. I guess I had a lot, but I also didn't have a lot to say about this movie. So in general, what can I say about the first Lethal Weapon movie that hasn't been said 100 times already? It's one of the best, if not the greatest, buddy cop action film series of all time. It may have some competition with a couple other things out there, like maybe the Death Wish series. But I haven't seen the Death Wish films. I know how many Death Wish movies are there? Like 5, not counting the new Bruce Willis one. Um, but overall, the first Lethal Weapon movie, while I do love it and it is one of my favorite films, it's not my favorite of the series. Oh, there is 5 Death Wish movies. Okay. It's not my favorite of the series. In fact, I think in the general scope, it just might be one of my... It might be my least favorite of the series. But take that with a bit of a grain of salt. Because I love all these movies for different reasons. I mean, I like the first one because it's generally a more of a dark and serious film. I like the second one because it's a lot funnier. It's a lot more action-packed. Just in general, I think it's a lot better. I love the third film. Third movie is probably my favorite because it was the first I ever saw. I think it's the funniest, and I think it has the best action. And I love the fourth film because it has the most amount of action. It's the longest of the series. And in general, it's a nice finale to the series. Even though there's apparently plans to make a 5th Lethal Weapon film, I'd like to see that. But if it doesn't happen, I'm not really going to split my hairs apart over it. So, my overall rating of the first Lethal Weapon film is a solid 8 out of 10. It's a very good film, very entertaining, one of the best 80s action movies out there. Probably the best buddy cop film of all time. However, I will admit I do prefer the sequels, like with the Rocky series. But the first film is a great movie, very entertaining ride, and I highly recommend it. If you have not seen it and you are a Lethal Weapon fan, how the fuck are you a Lethal Weapon fan? Check the movie out. It's really, really solid. Hey, I liked Over the Hedge. It was a pretty funny movie. Death Battle is not real. It's totally fake. Look up Cartoon Fight Club. What the fuck are you talking about? Well, hey, Godzilla vs. Gamera Death Battle was pretty fucking awesome. So, post your comments down below. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, share this video with your friends, and go out there and become a cop and pair yourself up with either an A, stick up his ass, by the books cop who becomes your best friend, or a psychopathic nut job who likes to spit in the face of danger who becomes your best friend. You be the judge. And I will see you in the next one. Have you seen the TV series yet? Yes, I have seen the TV series. I'm very close to finishing the first season of the show. And I'll give it a rewatch second time to actually give more of my thoughts on the series. And I will do that after I finish the Lethal Weapon films. And I will see you in the next one with Sinister 2 review.